It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for tuning in. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. And joining me today, as always, is my co-host, Landon McCool. You can check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. You can also listen to him to the Best Coast Boys podcast. Landon, what's going on, sir?
Not a ton, we are still counting down to training camp. The drumbeat of news is starting to get louder as football players are clearly spending too much time away from facilities, and now we're starting to see, police reports and things happening with the offseason, right? Scary time of the offseason for sure. Yeah. So, but we're going to focus on continuing our positional review, and this may be a supersized show, Marcus, just because we're covering a position where it feels like there are a ton of players here, and certainly a ton of players worth talking about. And it's an interesting group to say the least. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about the Cowboys linebackers, and we're a lot of guys to mention here. We're going to be doing this kind of quickly, going through one guy. But let's start with this. I'm going to ask you two questions. Mm-hmm. Number one, who is the best linebacker on this team right now, and who will it be by week 18 of the regular season? I think that it might be Jalen Smith right now. And it really, it's tough because I feel like there's a very high possibility that could be Leighton Vander, Esch, and that he's kind of bounced back from what we saw last year. But at this point, At least Jalen's staying on the field, and I mean he may make mental errors and there may be problems in the run game a lot, but I think he may be the guy that you most rely on, at least early on, which is it's tough to say because like I said, we haven't even seen Keanu Neal play linebacker yet necessarily. That was going to
be my answer, honestly.
Yeah, and that might be the right answer. I mean, it's just that we haven't seen it yet, so it's kind of hard to know. But I certainly would not at all be surprised if we go out to training camp and Keanu Neal is immediately the best linebacker on the field.
And then by the end of the season, it's Micah, probably.
Probably Micah, yeah, I would think so. Unless somebody else, at least Jabril Cox is even better than we imagined he would be, and it just kind of shoots to the moon. But I think. Just with that blend of skill set and a renewed focus on football, I think it would be surprising if Parsons outpaces it. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I don't even know where to start. Let's start with some of the veteran guys, and we'll work our way down. Landon, okay. Jalen Smith, obviously had struggled last year, was a little bit better in 2019, was a Pro Bowl level player in 2018, and then struggled in 2017. Is this the last year of Jalen Smith in Dallas?
It certainly feels that way. It certainly feels like unless he can really have some kind of career resurgence, which I certainly don't think is outside the realm of possibility. No. With the change in defense and just kind of better a fresh start on with the new defense. It's definitely a make or break season for Jalen. A lot of it has to do with the contract he signed, and I think it seemed like a good idea, for the front office at the time just to try to get ahead of things. The Cowboys have done this on several different fronts before, and it's worked about 50% of the time, I would say. I think there were a lot of times last year where he was falling victim to what was happening in front of him and a lack of talent in front of him. And there were definitely times when it felt like he was forced to try to make the defensive tackles right. And forced to kind of cover two gaps in the run game because of an inability to get any kind of push or to maintain a gap by the defensive tackles.
I mean, is it going to get better this year?
I think it is. I think
because I'm not sure though. I don't necessarily trust those guys in front of them yet.
I understand that, but I have more concerns this year about how we're going to generate a pass rush in the middle of the defensive line than being able to keep blockers off the linebackers. Simply because you've got someone like Urban, you've got someone like Bohanna, you've got some more of these guys. I mean, say what you will about a guy like Carlos Watkins. I think he can two gap. He can, maintain a blocker at the line of scrimmage and keep at least your linebackers clean. Those are incredibly valuable guys. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we're only talking about the run game. But I do at least feel better about them doing that with the personnel that they have this year than they had, certainly last year. But is that enough to make Jalen, and a better player, a player worth the contract that he's in? That's the $1 million question. And clearly there's a reason that they brought in all these linebackers, right? I mean, they signed one in free agent, they drafted two relatively high that they feel good about. So clearly no one's job is completely secure. It's certainly not Jalen's.
Do you know the one thing I will say about Jalen compared to the other linebackers on this team is I feel like he's the only one that has a set in stone role and position, right? Like he's the middle linebacker of this team. Like he's not going to play weak side linebacker. He's not really a strong side linebacker. Some of these other guys, and we're going to get to Leighton Vander Esch in a second, like I don't know what his best spot is. I don't even know what Micah Parsons' best spot is yet, right? And I do think because there's at least some – hey, we know what Jalen is and what he does. There's some familiarity there, and maybe that's why he'll be the week 1 starter against Tampa Bay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be I think he can, have a little bit more flex and play. I think he can play Sam if you needed him to, and if you wanted that. If you needed him
to, but I really feel like he's a middle linebacker through.
But I agree that I feel like he's, in a situation where you very clearly know what his skill set is, and you know what he can do well and not well, and kind of. And I guess that brings us to Leighton Vander Esch, where, I mean, the real problem here is not just injury. It's that you get inconsistent play at this point from him, even when he's healthy. I mean, what you saw from him his rookie year was just this incredible, complete athlete at the position who was able to play the run game and the pass equally well. And then, you saw some struggles the following year, up until he got injured that, you were concerned about. And then the hope was, going into last year, we weren't even sure if he was going to play or what the status was. So, he comes out, automatically says, hey, I'm playing. It's not a thing. And then he comes back out and you see kind of a little bit more of the same, where he just doesn't look as certain as he did previously. He doesn't look as confident. I've noticed a lot more balance issues and issues with being able to stay on his feet and like all this, this stuff that didn't really show up on tape his first year, all these problems that he just didn't have his rookie year, seemingly, not so much a ton, but it felt like he was missing more tackles and or at least getting his hands on guys that in previous years they would never escape, and now they're able to slip off his tackles. So, look. The issues with Leighton are a multitude, right? It's injury, it's technique, it's consistency, and they kind of all are feeding into each other a little bit, I would imagine as well. So the question now becomes, okay, he's mostly healthy coming in throughout this offseason. He didn't really necessarily have to deal with offseason surgeries the way he had.
I think it's the healthiest he's been since the rookie season, right?
I think that's fair. Yeah. So the question is that enough to kind of get him back on track to being the linebacker that we saw his rookie year, or is the Leighton Vander Esch that we've seen the last, I don't know, it's 10 games or whatever it is,
just who he is?
Is that who he is? And if that's the case, then I mean, I would say that he's even more on the hot seat than Jalen is for sure.
My problem with Vander Esch is I just feel like he's such a clunky fit in Dan Quinn's defense, right? Because Dan Quinn's defense is all predicated on speed, right? Yeah. And if we've learned anything about Leighton Vander Esch over the last 3 years is he's not somebody that's great taking on blocks. So that kind of excludes him from being a middle linebacker, right? He's just not a middle linebacker. So that makes him a weak side linebacker, okay? But the problem is Dan Quinn wants a lot of speed there. And Vander Esch is very athletic, but I think Dan Quinn has a different type of athlete in mind for that weak side guy, right? He really wants the 225-pound guy that can change direction and cover running backs really well. And while Vander Esch is really good in like drop zones, he's just not that type of athlete. He doesn't have the quick twitch of a Keanu Neal or a Deion Jones, who the Falcons had. So where does he play in this defense? I don't know.
Yeah, and frankly, it was a concern when, at least, something that I've talked about when they first drafted him is that, he's not too different a player than Jalen Smith, right?
No, they're very similar, except for he's worse at taking on blocks and better in coverage.
Yeah, and that's not such a great combination to have together, right?
No.
They don't accentuate each other. They kind of just have very similar weaknesses. And so that makes it kind of an exploitable duo.
So let me ask you this. Let me flip this around.
Mm-hmm.
Of the linebackers on the team right now, which is the best combination, or the best pairing with Vander Esch? Because that I don't know. Like, who was the best guy
Vander Esch?
Yeah.
Well, that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
really, because if you're talking about pure skill set. Yeah. If you're talking about pure skill sets, then I would say that Jalen. But the problem is that you would rather have, you kind of just need Leighton Vander Esch to be better at taking on blocks. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you kind of just need him to play middle linebacker, and he's just not good at it. He's just that's not what he does well. He spent all his time at Boise State slipping blocks. And that's what they taught him at Boise State, was to slip blocks and not necessarily to take on blocks. So that's the technique he's been using. And like I said, his rookie year, he didn't have any problem getting to where he needed to go to make tackles.
No.
But as teams have figured out that they can get bodies on him and slow him down, and it's not even just slowing him down, Marcus. It's like once he gets engaged, like he kind of like loses his sense of where he is in the play.
It's over.
Yeah. And so it's just to answer your question. I guess the answer is Jalen Smith.
But you don't spend the 12th pick on the draft if you feel good about Jalen and Vander Esch coming back. You know what I mean? Like, it's clear that they wanted something different. Listen, the answer is probably 12 months from now, it doesn't matter, right? Because there's a good chance that neither of these guys are on the team.
The bottom line is it doesn't really matter who pairs well with Leighton, is because you need a linebacker who can go out there and cover. And if you've got Jalen and Leighton out there, you don't really have that linebacker. No. So it does, all of this is moot unless you got a guy out there who can do something in the pass coverage game for this defense. And if you put both Leighton and Jalen out there, you're just continuing to expose yourself. And frankly, that's why they bring in guys like Parsons and Neal and those sort of things. So
it's why I still think, even though the Cowboys have said so many different ways that they're not trading Leighton Vander Esch, it still makes sense on paper to trade him because it's one guy out of the room. I do think he has some trade value, whether it's just a 5th or 6th round pick. We'll see. Unless he plays significantly better, I have a hard time envisioning this working out for the Cowboys.
The numbers are just, and we'll talk about it. There's just too many linebackers. And when you've got too many linebackers and you've got, one or two guys who just can't seem to pair well with almost anybody, what are we doing? Like, let's just cut bait and like see if we can get something for him or so one of these guys, right? And then try to figure out the best pairing to play with.
All right, let's take a quick break so I can tell you guys about Bet Online, the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your sports action. Baseball season is in full swing, and you can track all of the action on Bet Online. Before the next pitch, head over to Bet Online on your laptop or mobile device and check out all the great sporting news, sign-up bonuses, and contest information. Don't sit on the sidelines anymore, as this is your chance to get into the game as teams prep for their runs to the playoffs. Head to the website or use your mobile device today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet Online, your online sportsbook experts. All right, let's continue to talk about the veterans. Keanu Neal, the Cowboys signed him to a 1-year deal worth $5 million. He is making the transition from box safety to weak side linebacker, which basically means he's playing the exact same position that he did with the Falcons. I thought he played pretty well last year. Played 15 games, had over 100 tackles. It's pretty clear by the end of the season that he was recovered from his, I believe it was his torn ACL. What are we expecting from him here this year, and how much do we expect him to play?
I mean, I expect him to play a lot, I think. The question is the role. And I think that he is probably your day one nickel linebacker starter. I think whether or not, I mean, we just talked about it. You don't want to go back into a season where you're forced to play Jalen and Leighton in known passing downs. I think, and that's why you bring in a guy like Keanu Neal, is so that you can have a safety playing linebacker for you who can do a little bit more in coverage. I mean, look, he had gotten a little bit slow for the safety position, right? Sure. Or at least, the assignments that were being required for a true safety, right? I mean, he still clearly was very good at what he does well, right? Being a box safety, covering in short and drop zones, in the hook, in the curl. He could still do all those things all day. And I think he could still do things like, some limited coverage on running backs and tight ends and that sort of thing. But, asking him as a strong safety to go out into the slot and cover, this is the kind of player that you're seeing being put in the slot nowadays, that may have been a little bit too much for him. So I think that the move to kind of a nickel linebacker role, which really accentuates what he does well, which is finding the football in the run game, short zones, taking on that caliber of skill player that he would be matched up in man coverage from that position. I think those are things that he should be able to do really well, and it really accentuates his skill set. The question now becomes, how does he get deployed? And I think, to me, it's very clear that, if you can find a way to just kind of keep him, at least early on, in the nickel and dime packages, if you feel like he could do more, then maybe you could start putting him in some of these early base packages, because I think that's really where he's going to have the most difficult transition, right? Because he's not used to playing behind a three, not necessarily regularly behind a three technique, and reading the keys and cues to kind of flow in the run game. It's just kind of a slightly different angle. So you can put him at a nickel linebacker spot. He's done that before, clearly in some form or fashion, or at least it's very similar to what he does as a strong safety. And I think, as you're seeing how he develops as a true off-ball linebacker, maybe you start subbing him in more for Leighton, or subbing him in more for whoever ends up at will, and seeing if he can do more on base downs.
My hope for the Cowboys defense this year is they're not so stuck on, these are our 11 starters and these are our backups we rotate in. Like, honestly, Landon, week 1 against Tampa Bay, I'm not messing with Leighton, Vander, Esch, and Jalen Smith as the starters. Just put Keanu Neal in there. Like, he's going to have to cover Giovanni Bernard and some of those running backs out of the backfield. I'd rather just have him playing in space than Vander Esch or Jalen, who Brady's just going to pick on the entire game long, right? Like, just give me the best guys against a certain scheme. Maybe there's other games where, you're going up against a team that uses a lot of 2 tight ends, and it doesn't make sense to have Keanu Neal playing 75% of the snaps. That's where I would like to see the Cowboys defense get to, not where it's just multiple, but where they specifically designed the starters for that week around the offense and that game plan.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the idea of us having, and really it's an outdated conversation to talk about starters versus.
It is, but for some reason, a lot of teams are so dead set on these are our starters. We're not going to rotate them off the field no matter who we're playing, and it gets them killed.
Deploying personnel groups that are appropriate to what the offenses that they're facing, that's the key. Yes. Finding a way to have matchup specific personnel groups depending on who you're playing that week, that's the key. And having all these types of linebackers, again, we still feel like there's probably an extra one, but even if they decide not to trade Leighton Vander, and even if they decide to, or whomever, let's say they keep all these linebackers, if they decide to do that, the positive side of that is that you can still use this in combination with all the variety of kind of different players that you have on the defensive line to mix and match your fronts to better, match up with what you're facing week to week. So you and I have been banging the table for this. The good news is that we're hearing all the right things from Quinn about it, that it's a week to week thing. It's a matchup thing. It's our personnel versus your personnel, trying to ham fist it like Marinelli. And again, that kind of just goes back to the point and the differences between Marinelli and Quinn, right? Is that Marinelli, hey, these are our guys. We're going to teach these guys how to be as good as they can at what they do,
rules, yes.
and hopefully beat you.
Yep.
With Marinelli, with Quinn, he still wants them to play fast, but that doesn't mean that you can't mix and match your personnel to get get your players in a situation to best perform. And I think that's where we're going to really see the difference between how these linebackers play in the previous situations and how they're playing now.
All right, let's finish up the veterans. Listen, who has a better chance to make this team, Francis Bernard or Luke Gifford? We don't have to spend a lot of time on these guys.
Yeah.
Bernard did not do a lot last year. Gifford has been a training camp darling for the last 2 years. Do we have any high hopes for either of these guys?
I mean, it's not maybe Bernard just because he's a little bit younger, maybe the coaching staff, but I mean for Gifford, it's like a lot of these guys without someone who is supporting them or promoting them, sponsor. Yeah, it's really difficult especially with the numbers right now, right? Yeah. It's just gonna be really difficult for them to make it.
That's funny that you picked Bernard because I think it's Gifford just because he's far more athletic. He's better in coverage. Francis Bernard would be like slow for their defensive tackles. So I think that's a bit of a problem.
That's a good point.
It's going to come down to who's better on special teams. And the answer could be neither, right? Like if the Cowboys find somebody through waivers or free agency that has more speed and more experience on special teams, I wouldn't be surprised if they go that direction. So I don't have my hopes up for either, but you will probably see a ton of them in the Hall of Fame game, which is in what?
3 weeks? Yeah. 3 weeks. Yeah.
All right, let's take one more quick break so I can tell you guys about Built Bar. It's the absolute best tasting protein bar out there. It's hard to even explain it. It's real chocolate with amazing flavors. It's just a great combination of low calories, high protein, and low sugar with no crazy additives. Best of all, they taste absolutely fantastic. Go to BuiltBar.com and use promo code LOCKEDON and you'll get $10 off your next box at BuiltBar.com. I also want to tell you about RockAuto.com. It's a family business serving auto parts to customers online for over 20 years. They have everything from engine control modules and brake parts, motor oil, and even new carpet. Whether it's for your classic or your daily driver, get everything you need in a few easy clicks delivered directly to your door. The RockAuto.com catalog is unique and remarkably easy to navigate. Quickly see all the parts available for your vehicle and choose the brand specifications and prices that you prefer. Go to RockAuto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in the How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know that we sent you amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit RockAuto.com today. All right, let's talk about the two rookies. We've spent a ton of time talking about Micah Parsons, where he's going to play, how the Cowboys are going to use him. Just in general, what are your expectations for him this year? Do you think he's a full-time starter by the end of the year? Do you think he's going to get 5-6 sacks? What are you expecting from the number 12 pick?
I think it's going to be it's hard to determine right now because I do think that either one of those paths or maybe a combination of those paths are possible for him, right? Where he maybe at first he's being kind of deployed as kind of a joker, right? Where you basically you could put him in as a pass rusher on some downs, you put him in as a linebacker in some downs. Again, going back to what we just discussed, deploying personnel packages that make sense for the offenses you're facing. Maybe 1 week it makes a lot of sense to deploy Parsons as a blitzer or as a pure pass rusher. They'll put him out there for that. Obviously, I think eventually at the end of the day, you want him as a starting linebacker who can also do some extra things as you need him. Yep. And then backfill his position that he would normally be playing with one of the guys, either Cox or Neal or whomever to kind of take his spot when he goes down to go rush the passer or whatever. So I think obviously they're starting him out at middle linebacker just to kind of learn the ropes, and then it's obviously easy to go from Mike if you need to. They're clearly also giving him lots of reps as a pass rusher, just to kind of get him used to that, to seeing what you've got there. So I think that you're definitely going to see snaps of him as a pass rusher. But the plan for the vast majority, I think early on especially, will be to try to work him in as a linebacker until he just takes that job and then becomes the guy that's the full-time starter at the position, and everyone's basically rotating kind of next to him.
Can I go ahead and predict a storyline or a headline that's going to happen 12 months from now? Are you ready?
Yes. Please.
Micah Parsons feeling more confident after playing multiple positions as a rookie. Like they're just getting. I promise you, this is going to be the story next offseason. They're going to call him.
It's probably already written, right?
yeah. They're going to fit him at one spot, and he's going to feel more comfortable because last year he was learning too many different positions. I get it. They're trying to just find ways to get him on the field. I don't blame him at all. I do think we'll see his best play once they finally figure out, hey, he's a middle linebacker that just plays downhill. That's just where he's best at. Once he gets more experience taking on blocks, reading keys, he'll be just fine. The entire show today, Leighton, was just 25 minutes, so get rid of all that stuff so we can talk about Jabril Cox, the most important linebacker on this team.
Yes.
Do we expect him to have any role as a rookie, or do you think the Cowboys are kind of going to redshirt him on defense?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, just there's a lot of kind of conflicting angles there. You know, the thing about it is that he could very well be the best coverage linebacker on the team.
I think he is.
Day one. Well, I mean, I think Keanu Neal probably might have something to say.
I mean, he's just so good at it. He just has such a nice feel for it. But you're probably right. Just overall, Neal's better.
Yeah, and so my thought process there is that, you know, the thing that's difficult is that because he's so good at a skill that is so highly desired, I feel like it's going to push his the need to put him on the field earlier than we kind of expect. But the downward pressure there is that you've got 5 linebackers ahead of him, you know, and all with probably better
more skins on the wall. I mean,
well,
right?
Yeah, at least more right to be on the field or more reason to be on the field than Cox, right? So, like, whether it's, you know, because of investment in contract or investment in draft pick, you know, like he's got guys who have priority over him in the pecking order, I guess, at least to start out training camp. So it's really going to be all based on how he plays. I think what will happen is if he gets out there and he's just lighting it up and no one can get away from him, I don't think they'll shy away from playing him.
I agree.
But I think if he goes out there and he looks like a rookie linebacker who's still kind of learning his way, there's no reason to you know, push the gas on that. There's no reason to force him into this. Like there is every ability for this team to kind of slow roll him in. Honestly, I think he's talented enough that even with that process, even with the kind of slow roll into the lineup process, I can't imagine that he isn't getting playing time by the end of the season. Just because I think he, you know, just because of what happens over, we got an extended season as well. So I just think that because of injuries, because of the ascension of young talented players, even a slow process for Jabril Cox, I don't know if it'll be a redshirt year, maybe a redshirt half season.
Yeah. I think a very realistic, you know, kind of arc for Jabril Cox would be get a home on special teams, right? Like try to be on all the core special team stuff. And then by the time we get to, let's say, late November, December, try to see if you can get 5-10 snaps on defense, and then have the hope be going into the 2022 training camp that, hey, we've got Micah, who's a starter. We've got, let's say we bring back Vander, Esch, and then we've got Jabril Cox, and those are our 3 guys. Like, I think that's kind of what you want to work towards. I think it's unrealistic to think that he earns a starting job this year. I think it's unrealistic unless they have a bunch of injuries that he's playing 70 snaps a game. It's just not going to happen. But we do want to see him kind of gradually working his way out of the field and hopefully being ready for a competition for snaps by 2022.
Yeah, I mean, I think – yeah, I am, because I think like the truth is that, you know, you don't want to push him too hard because you do have plans for him in the future, and you don't want to like you don't want to not put him on the field when you need him, you know. So I think that there is a chance that, you know, as the season goes on, you're going to need him more and more. So I think it's important that he's, you know, involved early on special teams.
He's active,
I think
right? He's on the field. He's out there on the, you know, getting snaps, however he's getting them. I agree.
If someone gets hurt or needs a breather, give him 3 snaps. You know, get his feet wet on defense, because I think by the end of the year, you're likely going to need his skill set.
Yep, and even if it's just on a 3rd and 15, you know, get him on the field just to you know, get his ears wet.
Again, find packages for all
Yes.
these players. There's no reason to just kind of sub in and out. Find groups that make sense together, that make sense with what what you're facing in the offense. That's the best way to get these players out there to get experience and to get them playing at to their best abilities, because you're accentuating their talents.
That is it for today's show. Thank you guys for tuning in. As always, you can download or subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Continue to support us on YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter at Locked On Cowboys. You can follow Landon at McCool BCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. We'll be off on Friday. We'll be back on Monday to continue our training camp previews. So we'll see you guys then.